Wake Up to Money.
Welcome to the Wake Up to Money podcast. You're listening to Sean Farrington and Mickey Clark on BBC 5 Live. Coming up today, we hear how the Labour Party would use government support to help small businesses pay a higher minimum wage.
You have to do that by doing things like what we propose, which is to increase the support from the employment allowance.
I've been speaking to Shadow Small Business Minister Bill Esterson about his party's policies and how they'd pay for them. Plus, the cost of the supermarket shop is on the up again. Have you noticed food prices rising at their fastest for 3 years? And Mickey, of course, will be here. Lots of numbers, much more.
Yep, certainly will. The FTSE closed down just over 1/4 of a percentage point at 7,526. The Financial Times front page says US shoppers put its economy back on course to lead a global recovery. And inside it reveals the combined worth of European football's leading clubs grew by about £2.5 billion over the past year.
This is BBC 5 Live.
So, Labour says it will subsidise small businesses to help them pay a minimum wage of £10 an hour if it gets into government. This is all in an interview for Wake Up to Money. The Shadow Small Business Minister, Bill Esterson, says the current employment allowance would be extended to help companies which are struggling to pay staff that increased amount. And this is, Mickey, there's a few different things on the minimum wage, living wage, but there's been a bit of movement over the last couple of years in them.
There has. The living wage is what you would need to get by in the course of things. It's usually a bit higher than the minimum wage, which of course was set some years ago. And you know, they're confusing, to be honest. Why don't we just have one?
Well, I think that's part of Labour's plans, isn't it? I think to actually just bring them all up to a certain level. So what have we got at the minute? The current national living wage for over 25s is £7.50 an hour. Labour's pledged to increase that by £2.50 by the end of the next Parliament if it wins the election next week. Bill Esterson explained these plans.
Our proposal to increase the minimum wage to £10 an hour or more is accompanied by support for smaller businesses, because we recognise that, particularly in sectors like care, in hospitality, in retail, in agriculture, businesses won't be able just to say, we're going to pay an extra £2.50 an hour by the end of the next Parliament. So you have to do that by doing things like what we propose, which is to increase the support from the employment allowance.
So subsidised?
So yes, exactly. So the businesses won't have to pay the full amount.
Mickey, there's been a few different ways, hasn't there, of whether it's working tax credits, in-work benefits, whatever they might be, or just upping the minimum wage, living wages. George Osborne just came in and did that himself, didn't he, at one point? All trying to get those on low pay a higher income. Yeah,
businesses since the banking collapse have done well by keeping workforce flexible and low paid. We haven't seen the pay rises that have come through in other countries. But this does sound a bit like an open checkbook, because if you're a small company and you employ some people and you're getting subsidised to pay them, does that mean you take on more? So would the bill go up in the long run? And
the point, if you grow and you then become not a small company, a medium-sized company, there'll be thresholds and where are the cut-off points? Yeah. Lots and lots of questions around a potential topic like this. I got into lots of topics with Bill Esterson. You can hear a bit more of that later on the programme, nationalisation, whether we should be borrowing more as a country or not. But we want to hear from you today, particularly about increasing this living wage, the minimum wage, whatever you want to call it, to £10 an hour. And would you be happy for small businesses to get help from the government to pay that? If you're somebody who's on the minimum wage or on that low pay, do you really care how it ends up being funded, as long as that's what's coming through on the pay slip at the end of the day? If you're a small business out there, what do you think when you hear about the prospect of the minimum wage, living wage going up to £10 an hour? Jeremy Corbyn made the case to, that the debate on Monday, Mickey, or more a question and answer with an audience where a small business person said, these costs are going up and up. And he made the case, well, just generally, is this something we should be aspiring to or not? It's quite a big picture thing for a lot of
it is, and the other
to buy into, isn't it?
The other side of this coin is that if you do force businesses to pay more, a minimum set rate, of course, there is a danger, which has been threatened by bosses, that they cut jobs.
All of these questions, do let us know if you are running a business, or if you're somebody who has any influence at all on what staff might be paid, get in touch with us. You can text us on 85058 or send us a tweet using the hashtag #WakeUpToMoney.
Wake Up to Money around the world
On 5 Live. 5 Live.
So, Mickey, quiet day on US markets, but there's been a bit more data, hasn't there? You mentioned something on the front of the FT. We've got some other stuff as well.
Yeah, the big markets in the US closed down, well, just a touch yesterday, easing back from the record highs of the past week. But there was good news in the shape of data that revealed consumer spending in the US grew at the fastest pace so far this year. And as a result of that, some of the GDP numbers for the rest of 2017 have been pushed higher.
We're joined this morning by none other than Justin Urquhart-Stewart from Seven Investment Management. Justin, morning.
Good morning.
Now, we've been talking about this. It's always the way on Wake Up to Money, isn't it? We'll talk about it for a few days or weeks, Mickey, and then, everybody else will start picking up on it. The FT today saying US shoppers putting the economy back on course to lead global recovery. And we've had a bit of a mixed response from people we talked to, Justin, about the confidence in the American consumer at the minute. What do you reckon? Is that putting us on course to lead global recovery?
Well, you look at all the data at the moment, there's confidence indicators, and they're quite consistently showing that the American consumer is as confident as they've been for the past 12 years. Look, you go back now to 2008, and it was the consumer was the one that was hit. Remember the old figure? It's between 60 and 65% of US GDP is basically down to that consumer. Mr. and Mrs. Joe Schmo shopping in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they're the ones that actually keep the economy going. When the when the housing prices got hit, their consumer confidence went. As they fixed the banking system, the house prices started improving again, and we've seen a direct correlation there. Now we've got wage rises still tracking up at a reasonable level. We've got unemployment at a very good level indeed, despite what the President likes to think. And we've got house markets rising at about a nice flat sort of 5%. That's okay.
Well, two questions, Justin. First of all, is it a good thing that the US and UK economies are the recovery is led by consumers rather than industry? And secondly, what sort of pay rises have the Americans been getting? Because we haven't been getting much over here.
Yeah, you're right. Well, to answer the first point, it would be much better if we had a broader recovery and not just based on consumer. As we know, we talked about many times before, we're focused very much on consumer spending, and we've lost that industrial side. It has been growing on manufacturing. It went down to about 7%. Now it's been up to around about 11%, but nowhere near where it was at its peak, which was probably between 24 and 28%, something like that. So, yes, it's good it's a recovery, but it would be better if it was broader than that. So that sort of issue. And I've forgotten what the second question was now, because I'm thick.
Well, it was clearly that good a question.
How much are they getting paid in America compared with us?
Their levels of pay are higher than ours. They've been getting higher levels, round about sort of, just under 2%, so ahead of inflation. Our levels have just been virtually flat here. And so finding it very difficult indeed. So people are actually finding, of course, particularly as the latest figures have come out, they've got a lot of borrowing, and inflation rates for the year have now overtaken pay rates for the year. So we've now gone back to the situation where, on average, people will be feeling a little bit poorer over the next year.
We've had a couple of texts in on this. Paul's got in touch saying, we're talking about this Labour policy to increase the minimum wage. He says, I'm a skilled engineer with 30 years' experience, and I'm only paid £12 an hour. £10 minimum wage will drive up all wages and cost all businesses more. I mean, Justin, when you look at any kind of minimum wage, there's always talk, isn't there, when it was first introduced and then whenever it's been increased, that it might affect the amount of jobs available out there. But yet, we've seen increases over the last few years in the minimum wage, and our unemployment rate in the UK is the lowest it's been for decades.
Yeah. But our unemployment has changed. What we've now got, the 0 hours policy for many people has had a huge impact. So many more people employed, but doing almost less hours.
They've become more flexible, basically, haven't they?
Yes, and it's good that we're flexible. But it does mean that people don't then have the consistency of saying, I know I've got X number of hours. Now, some people want that flexibility, and it's actually very useful for the economy to have it. But on the other hand, one of the bits we are very bad at, particularly as you mentioned engineers there, you go to the continent, you see the pay levels there for engineers. They're regarded as much more of a profession, hair doctor engineer, whereas here the engineer is almost regarded as someone holding a spanner and a rag. That's wrong.
And what about British Airways? It seems they're still struggling to return baggage to passengers. I would have thought that was a dot on the cards that was going to be a problem.
I thought now when you fly with them, you pick up someone's bag, but not necessarily yours.
Yeah.
But it is astonishing actually how little the shares went down at the end of the day, because they went down initially. But then again, you have to look at the figures. This is going to cost them between 50 and 100 million euros, something like that.
Well, they were trading in Spain, weren't they, on Monday, whereas they weren't trading in London. But really, this is an appalling piece of bad management, isn't
Dreadful. But it's not as though it's anything new, is it? I mean, we had the issues over Terminal 5, we've had issues over these computer systems going wrong before, and the consistent thing is, when it goes wrong, there appears to be no sign of management. Any one of us running a business, when something like that happens, you'd be out there, on the front, actually saying, right, what can we do to help, try and put it right, or at least saying, sorry. How long did it take for the chief executive to appear? I found it astonishing.
So you can run railways, airlines these days, don't make a lot of difference, does it, what you're running?
Oh, dear. And it's well, you actually look there, the amount of that loss would be to them probably about 1% of revenue or 5% of profits, and that probably explains why the shares only dropped by about 1.5%.
But the loss to reputation.
That's the crucial bit, because how many people, like me, will be turning around, and I don't fly a huge amount, but turning around saying, actually, I don't like this brand anymore. I used to be very proud of it. I've now got a choice. I'm going to use it.
Well, this blends beautifully into the review of the papers, Mickey, because actually that's the one that is getting a lot of the headlines again. Share price, the Sun have highlighted the air bit of share, spelt it a bit of a different way there.
Oh, right,
share price dives £500 million, BA Tech disaster. And then in the Telegraph business pages, Walsh backs BA boss Cruise over power surge chaos. We haven't heard much from Willie Walsh yet, have we? But there you go.
He's been very quiet, hasn't he?
Yeah. He's very quiet because he's concentrating on the broader business, obviously, which includes Iberia and Aer Lingus, Vueling and things like that. So he's trying to sort of put himself above it and let sort of British Airways manage this one as a local problem rather than necessarily as a wide group overall.
And probably what managed to bring it all in focus yesterday, of course, we had some record profits from Ryanair. And it was as if Michael O'Leary was saying, this is how you run an airline.
It was wonderful. I mean, real chalk and cheese. There was the proud national flag carrier, really looking an absolute fool, and there was the discounter that everyone sneered at. I have to say, I didn't like flying, doing really rather well. Although I think it was Mr. O'Leary who said he didn't realise he could actually make so much money by trying to be nice to people, because that's what they've tried to do, and it makes a difference, funny enough.
Well, but for a long period of time, as we said yesterday, they made quite a bit of money by, being pretty tough on passengers, didn't they?
It was not
some kind of mood change.
Not a pleasant experience. But we were in a strange position with our markets at the moment almost being rather becalmed and serene. So now's the time to be slightly concerned, in my view.
The good story of the day, or the positive story, I suppose we should draw from this, is Amazon shares have topped $1,000, £779 a share for the first time. And there's a picture in the Telegraph of the chief executive, Jeff Bezos. He's got something to smile about. The market value of the retailer, $478 billion. I can remember when we used to talk about Amazon back in the 90s, where they would only talk about revenue, they wouldn't talk about profit because they never made one.
That was
and books as well.
There was always that question. But remember, when they floated the market, 97, $18.
Yeah.
So 18 to 1,000, that's not a bad return.
You didn't tip him, though, did you?
You're right.
Wouldn't be sitting here if he did. Well, he probably would, wouldn't he? He does enjoy coming on. Any other headlines in there, Mickey, that we've got?
The interesting one from BT is that BT is facing strike threat over the closure of the final salary scheme. I'm afraid these moves are fairly inevitable these days, closing the final salaries, where you're guaranteed a set sum at the end of your working life. But they are expensive. BT's got a huge pensions deficit. I think the last figure I saw something like 14 billion quid. But they're now going to either cap it or block it off and push it into a defined scheme. The workers are kicking off about it, and to a certain extent I can understand that, to be honest.
And something that was announced yesterday that's in the Mail: Tesco faces probe in £3.7 billion Booker bid. So an investigation has been launched into that deal between Tesco and Booker, amid fears it will harm competition and customer choice. So this is the Competition and Markets Authority, Mickey.
I'm surprised it's taken them this long to actually say anything about this deal. You, Justin?
Yeah, because some time ago everyone was saying, look, this is going to be anti-competitive. No, there must be an investigation. But that was, 2 months ago? So something should have moved by now. And really, it is actually holding the whole thing up. They need to know, can they go ahead with it or not? And it certainly will, I think, for certainly the smaller shops. It does put them in a position where they're going to be anti-competitive because Booker controls the supply to a lot of those smaller competitors.
And the other headache facing Tesco chief exec Dave Lewis is that he's been appeared to as a witness in a fraud case involving 3 of the retail giants' former executives. If you remember that story, still rumbling on.
That's still in there as well.
The accounting scandal a couple of years ago.
Plenty of the papers today. Thank you very much for your texts as well. Just on pay, particularly at the lower end of the scale. As a 22-year-old graduate, someone who works 5 days a week in London at a bank, followed by every Saturday and every other Sunday in a state agency on minimum wage to pay the bills, I'm stuck in between on the issue. On the one hand, it'd be great to see my weekend job getting paid more, but realistically, the higher wage levels there and across the country will only lead to higher prices, as we all know, and that will eat into my primary earnings. Tough to say what the benefit will be. In a nutshell, that is the dilemma for a lot of people when they're thinking about where the minimum wage should be. You can text us on any issue you hear in the programme. Get in touch, 85058. If you want to get in touch on social media, send us a tweet, use the hashtag #WakeUpToMoney. Labour says it will subsidise small businesses to help them pay a minimum wage of £10 an hour if it wins next week's general election. The pound fell sharply after a projection suggested the Conservative Party could fail to win an outright majority in the election on June the 8th. And new figures from the British Retail Consortium show food inflation is at its highest level in more than 3 years. We'll be talking more about that very shortly. A few more of your texts, though. John in Houston says, quantitative easing from the top down clearly didn't work. Why not try it from the bottom up by subsidising the minimum wage? Interesting approach, Mickey.
Yeah, well, I suppose they did that with PPI. That was a bit like quantitative easing.
Yeah, there was a lot of cash went in that way, wasn't there? Charlie says a subsidised minimum wage is a great idea. Cheap way for the government to improve economic confidence, stimulate spending. The payback will come in economic activity and associated tax income. Similar kind of point.
Providing you can cost it.
Well, then you hear from a few businesses who've got in touch saying, I have a small business. I regularly pay my staff more than I pay myself. The business cannot afford to pay both. I do not get the minimum wage. Labour's proposals, as always, will be unaffordable and will bankrupt the UK. I hope people see through that. That's the issue, isn't it, Mickey?
Well, it's either you want a poorly paid job or you want a good, well-paid job, but not for very long.
And one of the reasons wages is an issue is because at the minute prices are rising quicker than they have done for a while. Food prices in particular rising at the fastest rate for more than 3 years. That's according to some figures from the British Retail Consortium, represents our supermarkets, which says food inflation was 1.4% in May. That's how much prices have gone up. That was compared to 0.9% in April. We can speak to Rachel Lund, who's Head of Retail Insight and Analytics at the British Retail Consortium. Rachel, morning.
Good morning.
Why has there been such an increase in the last few months in the rate at which prices are rising at food?
Well, I think there's two things going on. I think one of the biggest factors has been the increase in global food prices. So if you look at the UN's food price index, actually prices are up about 15% on last year. So that's a major cost increase for retailers of food. And the second thing is the devaluation of the pound, which has sort of bobbled around at a 15% to sort of 12-13% devaluation since June. And that again sort of adds on a big cost to those retailers importing food from abroad.
So the difference there, you know, their costs have gone up by 10, 15, 20%, but yet the prices that are being passed on are increasing by 1 or 2% at the moment. So how much of a hit are suppliers taking from supermarkets at the moment?
Well, I think actually a lot of the supermarkets are absorbing quite a bit of the cost increase. I mean, you can look back at some of the sort of what we call producer input and output prices, and what we can see is actually the output prices. So the factory gate prices have increased by about 3.6%. So again, that's above what the retailers are passing on to consumers. So you know, in all for retailers, they're having to absorb quite a bit of the cost increase.
But supermarkets must take some of the blame for this inflation, because if you're determined to eat strawberries in January, it means you've got to import them. And we are importing an awful lot of exotic fruit and vegetables these days, which must be subject to a weaker pound. Is that what's generating some of this inflation?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the retail sector is very much in the hands of consumers. We have one of the most competitive retail industries in the world, and so shops can't really afford not to meet consumer demands.
Is it consumer demand or just the retailers competing? Because if I don't do it, the supermarket down the road's going to do it. Do we really want asparagus from, I don't know, Turkey in December?
Well, I think again, it's not really a choice that retailers have. They have to serve the consumer demand that's there. Otherwise, they face not being able to make money and ultimately not existing anymore.
So how long is it sustainable then, Rachel? If consumers want that, you say that retailers are actually taking a bit of a hit, and we've heard this phrase used by a few bosses when we've spoken to them of investing in price, but effectively taking a hit on their profits to try and keep prices a little lower than they might be. How long can that go on for?
Well, I think, we are going to see some further price increases over the year. It's not going to be a dramatic uplift, but we are going to continue to see them creep up, just simply because the maths mean that they're going to have to pass some of the costs through. I mean, elsewhere, retailers are going to have to find cost savings and efficiencies within their business to make the numbers add up.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, that you look at the margins of some of the bigger supermarket operators. They must have some fat there, because if you look at the discounters and some of the brands of stock that they're offering and the prices they're offering it at, then you think to yourself, well, hold on, if they can still make a profit at this price for a can of baked beans, the supermarkets must be charging double the price. So there's got to be a margin there. If they're absorbing these costs, they must have the room to do so.
Well, what we've actually seen in retail is margins fall over the years. And actually, the different retailers, the newer and the older retailers, have very different business models. And because we're going through such a big time of change in retail, some of the more traditional retailers actually are having to rethink how they do business, and so it might not be as easy for them to find the same cost savings.
But they've been forced to look to their game because of the discounters, haven't they? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The big four could have just carried on trading between themselves and competing between themselves, but the discounters threw that all up in the air and have forced them to look to their game.
Yes, so the introduction of new players like the discounters to the market have certainly added innovation and have certainly made retailers think again about how they deliver. I mean, if we look back 10, 15 years, actually the conclusion was the discounters had no chance in the UK market because British consumers wouldn't shop there. And that's changed so much, I mean, particularly since the crisis. So you're right in the sense that the new entrants have shifted the business model.
What's the biggest change supermarkets, the bigger supermarkets, more traditional ones, have made since the discounters have come in, do you think, Rachel?
I think it's hard to pinpoint exactly the change they made due to the discounters, but you've seen a lot of supermarkets reassess the range of products they have out. So overall, we've seen a drop in the total number of product lines offered across larger supermarkets. Alongside the discounters, you've also got the impact of online as well. I mean, that's shifting the retail industry as a whole. I mean, and that's a massive change.
Rachel, thank you very much for that. We'll see how much those prices continue to increase over the coming months. Rachel Lund there from the British Retail Consortium. Mickey, we've had easily the best contact from a listener this morning. Somebody's tweeted us using that hashtag #WakeUpToMoney, saying morning, and it's just a picture of a donkey looking over a fence at us this morning. Beautiful setting.
That's the island.
Christopher Griffin there has got in touch with us. Also, lots of people have been getting in touch about pay. After 30 years in business, I employ 14 people, and I receive the lowest salary. A £10 minimum wage would add £50,000 to my wage bill. That needs £120,000 worth of extra sales. If I could find that, I would do it now.
And these are the numbers that Labour have got to crunch. You can't just say we're going to subsidise it, because it's going to be a huge sum if you're not careful.
And then you see prices rising and you think, well, who's going to put up wages It doesn't seem to be so forthcoming from businesses in the coming months, does it?
No.
Complicated one. Do get in touch with us, though. Text us 85058.
Let's have a look at the markets now with Justin Urquhart-Stewart from Seven Investment Management. And Justin, noticeable yesterday that sterling was moving around a bit in an erratic form. Apparently, a poll, an election
on
poll,
the front of the Times, is it?
Yeah, suggesting a hung parliament is possible. Are we taking notice of polls again in the markets?
They seem to be all over the place at the moment. I think this is one where you do actually sit there and say, look, no, this is just another one, so just ignore it for the time being. But what is fascinating is every time you see that actually there's going to be a clear majority for the Tories, it looks as though then you're going to see a position where you're going to see sterling then getting stronger, and the other way around you see it getting weaker. Why? Well, the general view would be that if Premier May gets a clear majority, she's then got her own mandate, her own majority, and not dependent on maybe a group of right-wingers actually forcing or controlling the difference between the two parties.
But it does send out a mixed signal in the markets, doesn't it? That you've got sterling has been hit to the tune of about 20% following the referendum, and it's bounced about a bit. I mean, it was down about half a percentage point at one stage yesterday. But then you've got shares at record highs.
Well, you've had this astonishing variability in sterling in the past year, haven't we? Because we went, at the referendum, 150, we went down to 118, and now here we are at, 128, we need to touch 130 for a while. Very difficult if you're running a business at the moment, and you've got trade overseas or goods coming in from overseas, and they're managing your margins like that. It is a huge variability, and of course for our markets as well. And as you've often said before, 3/4 of the FTSE 100 is actually effectively overseas trading. They're not UK businesses. And so, therefore, they will reflect that change in sterling the entire time. So, not necessarily changing the value of the underlying companies, but merely just being buffeted around by what sterling is doing in a very short-term way.
Let's test your extensive knowledge of football now.
Thank you. That won't take long.
There's a new survey out from the business services group KPMG, which, not surprisingly, says Manchester United is the most valuable football club in Europe, worth about €3 billion. That's £2.6 billion in real money. The Europa League winners, according to KPMG's analysis, had an enterprise value, which is what puts it ahead of the Spanish giants Real Madrid and Barcelona. I mean, these are businesses which have come to the fore in the past, 10, 15, 20 years because of television rights. Can it keep growing, though?
Now, do you remember when they first came to the market, and we had the first few companies as football clubs coming to the markets, and everyone discussing them as proper businesses? And of course, they're not proper businesses in the same way that we would normally expect a trading business to operate. It is a business, of course it is, it makes money, but it's actually based upon, as you just said, this media control in terms of actually making sure those television rights are there, with then a product which is hugely expensive to maintain on the basis of the cost of the old Brazilian football lace, and being able to manage all that through with these rights. It is, and with its own built-in level of inflation, basically being driven by players' wages. So it's very difficult to manage. You are dealing with global brand themes. That's how best to look upon them. And those brand themes all vary according to their success.
And before you ask, Sean, no, Wolves isn't mentioned.
I was going to wait for that commentary. New manager on the way, I hear, Mickey, but now's not the moment for that.
Many thanks for that, Justin. That was Justin Urquhart-Stewart from Seven Investment Management.
So, a week tomorrow, voters will go to the polls in the general election. Between now and then, we're going to hear from all the major parties on Wake Up to Money. We're going to have this music every day, Mickey. First up this morning, turn of the Labour Party. And in a few moments, we'll hear from the Shadow Small Business Minister, Bill Esterson, who'll explain why Labour would subsidise small businesses to help them pay a minimum wage of £10 an hour. We'll turn this down while that's on. But first, let's run through a few of the main policies of Labour's election manifesto. What's your pick, Mickey?
Yeah, well, if it wins the general election next Thursday, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has promised that his government would renationalise the railways, Royal Mail, the water industry and parts of the energy sector, as well as scrap student tuition fees and zero-hour contracts.
The state pension triple lock would remain in place. There'd be more free childcare for 2, 3 and 4-year-olds. income tax for those earning more than £80,000 a year would increase.
The minimum wage would rise to £10 an hour by 2020. The top rate of corporation tax would increase to 26% in the same year, and they would build over 1 million more new homes with at least half for social rent.
And they also say, in a bid to curb excessive pay at the top of Britain's companies, they would charge companies a 2.5% levy on each of their salaries above £330,000 and 5% on those on £500,000. So there you go. Those are some of the manifesto pledges. In response, the Conservatives say Labour's sums don't add up, while the SNP and the Lib Dems say the party is weak and divided. So I spoke to Shadow Small Business Minister Bill Esterson about lots of those policies that are in Labour's manifesto and some of the criticism of them. And he told me why Labour wants to nationalise industries such as rail and energy.
At the moment, because you've got privately owned and privately run energy companies and a big six cartel, those prices are very high. And the returns go to shareholders. Well, we think that instead of returns going to shareholders, the money would be better invested in improving the supply and in lower prices for consumers and businesses.
Where would the money come from to nationalise the energy industry?
Yeah, well, there are three things. I mean, the railways is going to be the franchises returning when the franchises run out, which doesn't actually cost money. With the energy companies, it'll be we'll have government bonds instead of shares. And the reality there is that's going to see lower prices because we're not going to have to see the same payouts to shareholders that we do at the moment. So
we talk a lot about government bonds on the programme.
This is over a long period of time, isn't it? Because you don't borrow money that you have to pay back in 1 year. You borrow it over a great many years. After the Second World War, remember, the government then had to rebuild the whole country. The debt to GDP ratio was 240%. Now it's under 100%, isn't it? And so we managed it then. We paid off over something like 50 or 60 years the money that was borrowed then. And
so what you're saying
now
is,
in a much shorter period of time,
instead of trying to reduce the national debt, we should be looking to borrow lots more over the next decade or so. And think about paying it back in the long term, but you're very comfortable with an increasing national debt that is already £1.5 trillion.
Yeah, we've seen the Conservatives promise since 2010 that they would get rid of the deficit and start to see the national debt come down. Well, they've comprehensively failed to do that. Promised to do it by 2015.
But do you think? Does it matter that they've failed?
Promised by 2020. Well, it would have been better if they'd been more honest with people. Promised things that they couldn't deliver.
So is it about honesty, not about the level of debt? That's what I'm trying to get at. Do you know what I mean? Like, you've got to get your numbers right, haven't you? Because what's really important is you don't borrow money for day-to-day spending that isn't sustainable. I mean, that's why it's a bad idea as an individual to rack up credit card debt. You have the difference between good debt and bad debt, as it was explained to me when I was doing economics many years ago. Good debt is about investing against a business plan. It's investing against an income stream. In this case, that means higher growth, which leads to better tax receipts, which is how you pay for the interest, and in the long term, you pay off the debt by doing that. You're happy with the debt increasing as long as it's being invested in things like infrastructure?
I'm certainly not happy with increasing debt for day-to-day spending, which is why our golden rule will be that we've
got to pay it all back at some point. Like you say, you can talk about post-war. You're paying it back at some point, aren't you?
Yeah,
the national debt will increase
over a period of many years. That's right. I mean, but look, we're only talking about borrowing 25 billion a year for 10 years to leverage in similar amounts from the private sector, which actually is quite possibly lower than what the Conservatives are saying. So
the idea of nationalising an energy company so that the profits, you say, you can take back into the taxpayers' pot instead of returning to shareholders. Are you missing a large point of shareholders, which is that a lot of our pensions are invested in these big companies and are reliant upon a good return? And actually, it's not just fat cats somewhere creaming off those shareholdings. Actually, almost every single one of us will have some investment in these big businesses. Why do you want to reduce the returns on those investments?
And the pension funds are one of the sources of income, aren't they, for investing in infrastructure and indeed in the government taking back control
so
of
they need the money for that
companies
as well. You're going to be taking returns away from them.
Well, no, I don't think we are, actually. So, they're actually a source. If we talk about house building for a moment, we're going to we want to build hundreds of thousands of new council houses. Well, who's going to pay for that? It'll be people like the pension funds making that very sensible long-term investment. And, I think that is a really important source of money for the kind of investment in growth that the country needs and that business and industry needs.
I don't quite understand how that tallies with the issue that the Labour Party has with returns to shareholders that will be avoided, you say, by nationalising these industries. Yet at the same time, you want these pension funds to be investing in infrastructure.
Yes, we do, and they will they will see their returns from government bonds, won't they? But it will mean that you've got you've got the capital up front to invest in the roads, in the railways, in the improvements in broadband, the investment in the long-term investment in skills.
Just in your role, small business, shadow small business minister, I'm sure you talk to a lot of small businesses. When you see the added costs that a lot have had in recent years, auto-enrolment, minimum wage, do you feel small businesses have been hard hit?
Yeah, I do, and it's how government goes around doing these things. Because my sense from talking to businesses is that it's large businesses that have benefited from government policy. We've seen corporation tax come down and down, and then when George Osborne brought in the so-called national living wage, which incidentally is not a living wage at all, it's just a higher minimum wage, and it's only for people over the age of 25. When they brought that in, there was no consultation. It was suddenly imposed, and businesses had to deal with a 10% increase in their costs.
What should have been different?
Well, I think it's about how you do it, which is why our proposal to increase the minimum wage to £10 an hour or more is accompanied by support for smaller businesses, because we recognise that, particularly in sectors like care, in hospitality, in retail, in agriculture, businesses won't be able just to say, we're going to pay an extra $2.50 an hour by the end of the next Parliament. So you have to do that by doing things like what we propose, which is to increase the support from the employment allowance.
So subsidised?
So yes, exactly. So the businesses won't have to pay the full amount. And the second thing is, if you want to attract and retain the best possible quality of staff, then we've got to pay as well as we can. Now, I don't know any business owner who doesn't want to pay their staff well, but many of them really struggle to do so. And this is one way of helping them to achieve something that I know they're keen on doing.
If we look at big business, and there's quite a divide, isn't there, would you say, in the Labour manifesto, where you're going after big business?
Well, we've got some political choices to make, haven't we? Do we want decent quality health education? Do we want more police officers? Do we want more firefighters? And we've got to find a way of paying for it. And we've got to look at those who can afford to do so. And it is the larger businesses that are in a position to do so, which is why we're talking about raising corporation tax for large businesses, and we're defining that as businesses making a profit of $300,000 a year or more. But when we left office in 2010, the corporation tax was at, forgive me, I think it was 26%. That's where we're intending to put it back to.
28, wasn't it? And then,
sorry, it was 28. Yeah. We're talking about putting it back to 26. Thank you for the reminder. And what it will still leave us with is the lowest corporation tax rate in the G7, the largest economies, and one of the lowest ones in the developed world. We talked before, Sean, about the shortage of skills. We've got to make that investment. Otherwise, where's the growth coming from? And where's the skilled workers coming? Where's the productivity going to come from? Unless the government is playing its role. A successful economy is a partnership. It's a partnership between government playing its part, making those investments, and with business and with the workforce. And you've got to get all three bits right.
That's Bill Esterson, Shadow Small Business Minister, explaining why Labour has certain policies in its manifesto. Mickey, the one on borrowing, and it could go for quite a few parties, couldn't it? We've had a text in saying, somebody tweeting using the hashtag #WakeUpToMoney, Labour guy on 5 Live, we're only going to borrow £25 billion a year. But then you look at what the Conservative Party have been borrowing since the financial crisis, and it's not come down as much as they would have liked, is there?
No, it hasn't. I'm going to set up a job as a printer, printing government bonds. I think I'll be kept working 7 days a week. It's going to be interesting. But that business of subsidising small business, it doesn't sound as though it's much dissimilar from working benefits at the moment. You know, you subsidise people because they're not earning enough.
That's a policy we have been familiar with until very recently, isn't it? Brian in Ascot says, if you have been in a business for more than 5 years and you can't afford to pay staff £10 an hour, then you need to question whether your business is viable. I don't want to increase my wages bill to my 27 staff, but I can afford it. Whereas we've had another text saying, good morning, while I agree about a living wage, as a small business, I can't see a way of paying it. My clients won't pay us any more for our product, despite our increasing costs. We've been stuck on prices since 2001 and are just told that if we don't keep our costs, then someone else will. Our customers' profit has increased year on year, he makes the point.
Yeah, I mean, the Minister, the point that he made about investing in staff and training and that's a good point. But we were making that point on Wake Up to Money on the first day back in 1994, and it hasn't really improved. I mean, companies do need to pull their finger out, but unfortunately it's as if they've got no incentive to do so.
Thank you very much for all of your texts today. Martin in Scotland says, we already have low productivity in the UK. If people are guaranteed a fixed amount, regardless of ability and effort, there's even less reason for them to be productive. There's a word we've not seen a lot in manifestos, isn't it? Productivity, that's the big puzzle.
Because they can't get their heads around it. It's something we've got to improve, and it's just not improving at the moment.
There's various strategies out there from different parties about our future industrial prospects. We'll have much more in the coming days from Wake Up to Money on the different parties, but that's it today.
On digital and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
bbc.co.uk/5live.